What if I told you that in 1957, a bunch of street racers in Southern California were getting their doors blown off by a Buick engine everyone called a boat anchor? Picture this. You pull up to the starting line in your hopped-up small block Ford or Chevy, ready to collect another easy win against some old guy in a stock-looking Buick. The light goes green. By the time you realize what's happening, you're staring at his taillights disappearing into the night. The engine that just humiliated your carefully built hot rod. A motor that Buick engineers never intended for racing, with valves so small they looked like nails, in a car that weighed as much as a small yacht. This is the story of the Buick Nailhead V8, the most misunderstood and underestimated engine of the muscle car era. The year was 1953, and Buick had a problem. Cadillac and Oldsmobile had already launched their new overhead valve V8 engines in 1949, leaving Buick still pushing their ancient straight 8 that traced its roots back to 1931. The straight 8 was smooth, refined, and completely outclassed. Buick buyers were defecting to other brands in droves. General Motors executives made it clear, develop a modern V8 immediately or watch Buick's market share evaporate. The engineering team, led by Chief Engineer Charlie Chain and engine specialist Joe Turley, had less than 2 years to design, test, and launch a completely new engine. No pressure, right? Here's where things get interesting. While Ford and Chevrolet were chasing high-revving performance, Buick's engineers had different marching orders. Their customers weren't kids looking to race. They were doctors, lawyers, and successful businessmen who wanted effortless cruising power, not screaming RPM. The Buick buyer wanted to pass on a 2-lane highway without downshifting, climb mountain grades without breaking a sweat, and do it all in library-quiet refinement. So while everyone else was designing engines for maximum horsepower at high RPM, Buick went the opposite direction. They designed for massive torque at low RPM. That decision would accidentally create one of the greatest sleeper racing engines in American automotive history. The engine that emerged from Buick's Flint, Michigan Engineering Center in late 1952 was unlike anything else Detroit was building. Officially called the Buick V8, it quickly earned its nickname from the engine's most distinctive feature, incredibly small valves. At just 1.75 inches for the intake and 1.25 inches for the exhaust, they were tiny compared to the 2.0-inch intake valves common on other V8s. Hot rodders took one look at those valve heads and said they looked like nailheads. The name stuck, and the nailhead was born. But here's what those hot rodders didn't understand at first. Those small valves weren't a mistake or cost-cutting measure. They were deliberate engineering. Smaller valves meant higher velocity intake flow at low RPM. Higher velocity meant better cylinder filling. Better cylinder filling meant more torque exactly where Buick customers would use it, between idle and 3,000 RPM. The nailhead's intake ports were also unusual, entering the cylinder head at a much steeper angle than conventional designs. This created a natural swirl pattern in the combustion chamber that improved fuel mixing and combustion efficiency. The small valves and vertical ports worked together like a perfectly tuned intake system, generating tremendous cylinder pressure at low engine speeds. The first nailhead displaced 322 cubic inches with a bore of 4.0 inches and stroke of 3.2 inches. That was already bigger than Oldsmobile's 303 or Cadillac's 331. Compression ratio was a healthy 8.5.1, high for 1953. The camshaft was specifically ground for low-end torque with minimal overlap and short duration. The 4-barrel Carter carburetor was calibrated for smooth throttle response rather than maximum flow. Even the exhaust manifolds were designed for low-speed torque with long runners that helped scavenge exhaust gases at low RPM. Every single component was optimized for one thing: earth-moving torque from idle. The numbers told the story. The 1953 Nailhead produced 188 horsepower at just 4,000 RPM, but torque 300 pound-feet at 2,400 RPM. For comparison, Chevrolet's new 265 cubic inch small block V8 wouldn't arrive until 1955, and when it did, it made 162 horsepower and only 257 pound-feet of torque. The Nailhead had nearly 20% more torque, and it arrived 400 RPM sooner. In the real world, that meant a Buick could accelerate from 30 to 60 mph in top gear faster than almost anything else on the road without the driver ever touching the shift lever. But Buick wasn't done. In 1954, they bored the engine out to 4.125 inches, creating the 364 cubic inch Nailhead. Power jumped to 200 horsepower, but more importantly, torque climbed to 325 pound-feet, still at just 2,400 RPM. This engine powered the massive Buick Roadmaster, a car that weighed 4,400 pounds. Yet it could cruise at 80 mph all day long at just 2,500 RPM, the engine barely working. Fuel economy on the highway could exceed 20 mph, remarkable for such a heavy car. Buick owners loved it. The engine was everything they wanted, smooth, quiet, and effortlessly powerful. Then something unexpected happened. In 1955, a few drag racers in California started experimenting with Nailheads. Not because they thought the engine had potential, but because wrecked Buicks were cheap and plentiful in junkyards. A complete Nailhead could be had for $50. These racers figured they'd use them as temporary engines while they saved up for something better. What they discovered changed everything they thought they knew about performance engines. The first surprise came when they bolted a Nailhead into a lightweight 1932 Ford Roadster. The same engine that seemed lazy in a 2-ton Buick became a completely different animal in a car weighing half as much. That massive low-end torque that Buick engineered for highway passing translated into brutal acceleration off the line. While other engines needed to rev to 3,000 RPM to start making power, the Nailhead was already pulling hard at 1,500. In drag racing, where races are won in the first 60 feet, that instant torque was a huge advantage. The second surprise came when they started modifying them. Conventional hot-rodding wisdom said small valves would limit power, but the Nailhead broke all the rules. Those small valves that everyone mocked? They turned out to have an unexpected benefit. Small valves meant less reciprocating mass. Less mass meant the valve train could handle higher RPM without float. The vertical intake ports that looked restrictive? They created such good mixture motion that the engine would tolerate massive camshafts that would make other engines stumble and stall. The Nailhead's architecture was accidentally perfect for supercharging. Max Balchowsky was one of the first to figure this out. A Hollywood mechanic and road racer, Balchowsky built a series of specials called Old Yeller that embarrassed expensive European sports cars. His secret weapon: a 401 cubic inch Nailhead with a GMC 671 supercharger. While everyone else was struggling to make blowers work on conventional V8s, Balchowsky's blown Nailhead made over 500 horsepower and ran like a Swiss watch. The small valves that everyone said would limit airflow? Under boost, they created incredible intake velocity that packed the cylinders with dense charge. The engine made so much torque, it would twist drive shafts like licorice. By 1957, the Nailhead had evolved into its ultimate form, the 364 cubic inch engine, with what Buick called the vertical valve head design. The valves were canted at an even steeper angle, further improving mixture motion. Compression was up to 10.1, with the optional power pack that included dual 4-barrel carburetors and a hotter camshaft. Output reached 300 horsepower at 4,600 RPM and 380 pound-feet of torque at 2,800 RPM. In a light car, it was devastating. But the real magic happened when you started modifying it. The aftermarket quickly caught on. Iskandarian's company, developed radical camshafts specifically for the Nailhead. Howard's developed special pistons that bumped compression to 12.1 or higher. Offenhauser cast aluminum intake manifolds that could mount 3 2-barrel carburetors or dual quads. Jardine made headers that helped the engine breathe. With these modifications, a Nailhead could easily exceed 400 horsepower while still idling smoothly and pulling hard from 1,000 RPM. Try that with a small block Chevy or Ford. Tommy Evo, one of the most successful drag racers of the era, proved what the Nailhead could do. His four-engine dragster used four blown Nailheads, making a combined 2,000 horsepower. But here's the thing. Those weren't exotic race engines. They were basically stock Nailheads with blowers bolted on. The engine's fundamental architecture was so robust, so overbuilt, that it could handle massive boost without internal modifications. Evo's car ran consistent 8-second quarter miles at over 180 millibars, competing successfully against purpose-built racing engines costing 10 times as much. The Nailhead's unusual characteristics made it perfect for another application nobody expected: early jet boats. The Southern California jet boat scene in the late 1950s discovered that the Nailhead's massive low-end torque was exactly what a Berkeley jet pump needed. Jet pumps are essentially water turbines that need tremendous torque to accelerate water through the impeller. High-revving engines that made power at 6,000 RPM were useless. The Nailhead, making peak torque at 2,800 RPM, was perfect. A Nailhead-powered jet boat could get on plane instantly and accelerate harder than boats with twice the claimed horsepower. Let me put the Nailhead's torque into perspective. A 1957 401 cubic inch Nailhead produced 400 pound-feet of torque. The legendary 426 Hemi, which wouldn't arrive until 1964, made 490 pound-feet. But the Hemi displaced 426 cubic inches to the Nailhead's 401. Per cubic inch, the Nailhead actually made more torque than the mighty Hemi. And it made that torque 1,000 RPM sooner. In real-world acceleration, especially from a standing start, the Nailhead could hang with engines that made far more peak horsepower. The street racers figured this out quickly. On Van Nuys Boulevard, on Whittier Boulevard, on Woodward Avenue, Nailhead-powered cars started showing up and winning. Not just winning, but dominating. The typical scenario went like this. Some kid would show up in a lightweight Austin or Henry J with a Nailhead stuffed under the hood. The car looked like a joke. The engine sounded lazy, loping along with a lumpy cam. The competition, running built small blocks that screamed to 7,000 RPM, figured it would be an easy win. Then the flag dropped. The Nailhead car would launch like it was shot from a cannon, the massive torque breaking the tires loose and rocketing the car forward. By the time the small block hit its power band, the race was over. There was another advantage to the Nailhead that street racers loved: reliability. The engine's bottom end was massively overbuilt. The forged steel crankshaft was so strong that nobody ever broke one, even under extreme boost. The connecting rods were equally stout. The block itself was a deep skirt design with 5 main bearings, each one 2.5 inches in diameter. Chevrolet small blocks of the era used 2.3-inch mains. That extra bearing area meant the Nailhead could handle incredible loads without failing. You could beat on a Nailhead all night long, race after race, and it would keep running. Try that with a highly stressed small block, and you'd be picking up pieces off the pavement. The oiling system was another example of Buick's over-engineering. The Nailhead used a dual pickup oil pump that could maintain pressure even under hard acceleration or cornering. The oil galleries were oversized, ensuring plenty of flow to the bearings. The valve train was shaft-mounted rather than stud-mounted, providing better stability at high RPM. Every component was designed with a massive safety margin. Buick engineers had designed the engine to last 100,000 miles of luxurious cruising. That same overbuilding made it nearly indestructible in racing applications. But the Nailhead's golden age couldn't last forever. By 1963, the competition had caught up. Chevrolet's 409 made more power. Pontiac's 421 Super Duty was faster. Ford's 427 was stronger. The Nailhead's small valves, which had been its secret weapon, became its limitation. There was only so much air those tiny valves could flow, no matter how fast the intake velocity. Buick knew they needed something new. In 1967, they introduced the 400 and 430 cubic inch engines with conventional-sized valves and more traditional architecture. The Nailhead was officially dead. Or was it? Here's where the story gets really interesting. After Buick discontinued the Nailhead, something unexpected happened. Values plummeted. You could buy a complete 401 or 425 Nailhead for practically nothing. Hot rodders who remembered the engine's potential started hoarding them. They stockpiled blocks, cranks, and especially the rare vertical valve heads. Through the 1970s and 1980s, while everyone else was chasing small block Chevys, a dedicated underground of Nailhead fanatics kept racing them, kept developing them, kept pushing the envelope. Modern technology has revealed just how ahead of its time the Nailhead really was. Computational fluid dynamics analysis shows that the Nailhead's combustion chamber design, with its small valves and vertical ports, creates a mixture motion that modern engineers call tumble flow. This tumble flow improves combustion efficiency and reduces emissions. It's the same principle used in modern direct injection engines. Buick engineers in 1953, working with slide rules and intuition, had accidentally discovered something that wouldn't be fully understood for another 50 years. Today's Nailhead builders are achieving things the original engineers never dreamed of. With modern materials and machining, they're getting 600-plus horsepower naturally aspirated and over 1,000 horsepower with turbos or superchargers. The small valves that everyone said were a limitation? With modern valve materials and springs, they're spinning Nailheads to 7,000 RPM. The torque is still there, but now it's accompanied by serious top-end power. A modern-built Nailhead can accelerate harder than almost anything from idle to redline. The collector market has finally recognized what racers knew all along. A numbers-matching 1963 Riviera with a 401 Nailhead can sell for 6 figures. Original Max Wedge Nailhead parts are worth more than gold. Those boat anchor engines that nobody wanted, they're now some of the most sought-after power plants in the collector car world. The same guys who mocked the Nailhead in 1957 are now paying premium prices to own one. But here's what really matters about the Nailhead story. It proves that engineering excellence isn't always about following the crowd. While everyone else was chasing high RPM horsepower, Buick engineers focused on low-speed torque. They were mocked for it, called backwards, told they didn't understand performance. But they had the last laugh. That boat engine turned out to be one of the greatest street racing engines ever built, not in spite of its unusual design, but because of it. The Nailhead taught us that torque wins races, not horsepower. It taught us that reliability matters more than peak power. It taught us that sometimes the best solution is the one nobody else is pursuing. Most importantly, it taught us that in engineering, as in life, there's more than one way to solve a problem. Buick solved it with small valves, vertical ports, and massive torque. Everyone said they were wrong. 60 years of winning races proved otherwise. Today, when you see a restored Buick with a Nailhead under the hood, you're not just looking at an engine. You're looking at a piece of engineering philosophy, a reminder that sometimes the unconventional approach is the right one. Those small valves that everyone laughed at? They were actually a glimpse into the future, predicting the high-velocity, tumble-flow combustion chambers that modern engines use today. The Nailhead wasn't a mistake or a compromise. It was simply ahead of its time, waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. The next time someone tells you there's only one right way to build an engine, remember the Nailhead. Remember how a boat anchor became a giant killer. Remember how an engine designed for luxury barges became a street racing legend. Remember how Buick engineers, by refusing to follow the crowd, accidentally created one of the most underrated and capable engines in American automotive history. That's the real lesson of the Nailhead. Sometimes the best path forward is the one nobody else is taking. Sometimes the answer to beating everyone else is to stop trying to be like everyone else. What's the most underrated engine you've ever encountered? Drop a comment below and let me know. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of hot rodding's best-kept secrets, make sure to subscribe because we're just getting started exploring the forgotten legends of American automotive engineering. Until next time, keep those engines running, and remember, torque wins races, horsepower sells cars, but a Nailhead does both.